Hey everybody, Lee with LG Speed and Custom here, and welcome to part 6 of Shannon's 302 swap in her 1961 Comet. If you're just joining us on this build series, this is Shannon's 1961 Comet, and we have pulled the original 170 inline 6 out and replaced it with this 1991 Mustang 5-liter roller 302 and a C4 transmission. For everybody that watched the last video, thanks for coming back. That's super cool. We buttoned up the coolant system and did a couple little, got the choke and stuff hooked up, heater hoses, that kind of stuff, and we were working on the drive shaft. We ordered all the parts for the drive shaft. Those parts have since come, so I think we'll start this video off with getting the drive shaft all figured out, and we'll take it over to Ken at All Tech Machine and get him to build it and make it happen. While we're under there, I think we'll maybe see about getting some shifter linkage working. I ordered a transmission gasket and filter kit, so we'll throw that in and kind of button up some other stuff underneath. We got to put an electric fuel pump in because this engine was originally fuel injected, so it doesn't have the boss on the water pump for a mechanical fuel pump. So we'll put an electric fuel pump in line and maybe get a fuel line run on it. And yeah, we'll just, I don't know, we'll just see where it goes. It's Friday morning, so we'll work on it until Saturday late afternoon, and whatever happens, happens. So let's get to it. Here's our original Comet drive shaft. Notice how teeny tiny these little U-joints are. I think they're the smallest U-joints I've ever seen. They're almost like you could use these for a steering column. So our transmission currently has this for a slip yoke. It's just a 28 spline, and it takes a 1330 U-joint, which is, as you can see, massive. It is probably overkill for what Shannon's doing with this car, but when it was time to buy a slip yoke for this transmission, this was the only one that was available. We couldn't get one for a 1310. The world was just out of stock on them. So we got the 1331 because it was all that we could get. And if you'll remember in the last video, I was going to see if we could get an end yoke to go in here that would accept a 1330 U-joint so that we could have a 1330 on this end. And then on the far end, we were going to see about getting a conversion joint to go from the 1330 to the small one. And then we would put a 1330 end yoke in both ends of the drive shaft with plans of if the rear end ever blows up, we don't have to change the other end of the drive shaft. It'll already be ready to go, and we can just put a new U-joint in and continue on. So unfortunately, and I'm not the least bit surprised. In fact, I even said I don't think this even exists, but I was right. The one on the end does not exist. Nobody makes a conversion joint to go from the tiny little guy up to the 1330. In fact, we can't even get a 1330 end yoke to fit in this drive shaft tube. So what I've done is got a 1310, which is more in the realm of what we should be using on this. And with the 1310 end yoke, I was able to get a conversion U-joint. So a conversion U-joint, what it does is it's basically one side of the U-joint is this size and the other is this size, so that when you put them together, they work, even though they're different sizes. As far as that end goes, we're just gonna leave it the way it is. I know it's tiny, it's probably gonna be the weak point in this whole system, but until we upgrade the rear end, you know, it's gonna have to work. And in all reality, there's a couple people on the last video that said, you know, why don't you just upgrade the rear end now? And the main reason we're not upgrading the rear end right now, one, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. This rear end currently works fine. In fact, one of the first things Shannon did when she bought this car several years ago was put all new bearings and seals and everything in it. So the rear end works great. And you know what, in all honesty, for what Shannon is doing with this car, this is just her driver. It's not a race car. It's not going down a racetrack. In fact, if you guys follow this channel, you'll know that our racetrack just recently got demolished So it's definitely not going down a racetrack anytime soon. And in regular day-to-day driving, just driving down the street, going to work every day, this rear end will probably be just fine. The only time it's going to be under any stress is if you're like really romping on it, banging through the gears on a sticky racetrack. So, you know what? Let's try it. And it might last a year, it might last 5 years, it might last 5 days. Who knows? When it blows up, if it blows up, then we'll worry about that then. That's a totally different project for a totally different day. So, back to this. We're going to put this together so that it's one piece, and then we'll take this assembly and this drive shaft down to Ken, and he can work his magic. All right, with this all assembled, look at that, isn't that great? We can take this over to Ken now. I also grabbed Ken a couple shock tabs. He's building the Model A pickup, and I make shock tabs and hot rod parts and stuff like that. So we're gonna bring those over to him as well. If you need any parts, go check out lgspeedcustom.com. That's where they all are, as well as shirts, as always. Thanks to everybody who ordered shirts on the last video. That's so awesome, I love it. So, we got our shock tabs, we got our slip yoke assembly. We'll throw the drive shaft in the back of the truck and blast over to Rock Bay and say hi to Ken. Hi, Ken. We're gonna head over to Bumper now to see if Rick still has the transmission filter kit that I ordered 2 weeks ago and kind of forgot about. Well, there's no transmission filter here. They don't have in stock, I think. Rick, did you forget to order it? So, but they will have one for tomorrow, so we'll come back tomorrow and get it. Moving along. We're back at the shop now. So we're not gonna let the transmission filter hold us up, because it's not gonna hold us up. We'll have it tomorrow. So next thing down on the list, we have the shifter. Let's go under the car here, and I'll show you what's happening with the shifter. Basically, so here's our shifter lever on the transmission. It's in park right now. We've got reverse, neutral, drive, second, first. Let's go all the way back up to park. Now way up here is our shifter lever off the column. And attached to the shifter lever is this rod. So right now it is in park. And when you put it in reverse, neutral, drive, it's going to drop down. Basically, we just need to make this rod reach here, which is pretty easy to do because we have a zip disc and a welder. So if we basically chop this in half, put this little guy right here through the hole, and then take a piece of round rod and make a filler piece and weld it in. Pretty straightforward. So let's work on that. Here's my plan. Before I took this off, I measured how far from this point to the shift lever on the transmission was, and it's 7.5 inches. We need to make this 7.5 inches long. So I've got some 3/8 round bar that I found in the old metal pile over there. But rather than just cut 7.5 inches out of here, cut this in half and weld it together, I threaded one end. In my bolt bin, I found this piece of tubing that is threaded as well. So they go together like this. This other end here is drilled out so that a 3/8 piece of round bar slides in, like so. Now you're probably wondering what all this is about. When I cut this in half, I am going to slide this on one half and weld it. Then this bar that's going to be cut down will weld to the other half, and it will thread together. The reason I want them to thread together is so that you can fine-tune the shifter. There's nothing more frustrating than when you build shifter linkage and you think it all works and you take it for a test drive, and the first time you park on a hill, you put it in park and it goes click, 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 click in the park. You take your foot off the brake and the transmission park pin is just going clunk, 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 clunk as you start rolling down the hill, because it just needs to push the park lever just like a 1/16 of an inch further to fully engage it. But you can't because it's not adjustable. This way you can adjust it. You can thread it in, thread it out to get that just perfect sweet spot. So on that note, let's chop this guy in half.
Well, everybody's heard about the bird. I said the bird, bird, bird. The bird is a word. I said the bird, the bird. The bird is a word. I said the bird, bird, bird. The bird is a word. I said the bird, the bird. The bird is a word. I said the bird, bird, bird. Said the bird is a word. I said the bird, the bird. The bird is a word. I said the bird, bird, bird. The bird is a word. I said the bird, the bird. The bird is a word. Haven't you heard about the bird? Well, everybody's heard about the bird. I said the bird, the bird. The bird. I said the bird.
Look at that. Can make it longer or shorter. Adjustable shift rod. We're gonna go test fit it now. I have a feeling, just from when I had it sitting in there before, that we're gonna have to put a little kink in it, because when this is bolted tight to the column, our shift lever is actually like over here. So if we go boonk, it should be okay. But we'll test fit it first. The top part went in, and you know what? I think it's going to fit without putting a kink in it. There's enough, it's over a long enough span that there's enough flex in the rubber up there. But we need to, I think we got to come out one. Actually, you know what? That'll work. That'll work just fine. Okay, let me find some cotter pins, and then we'll test this thing. Okay, here we go. We're in park right now. So there's park, reverse, neutral, drive, second, first. Hopefully that's in park. I can't test it because we took the drive shaft to Ken. Normally I have the slip yoke in when I do this, and that way I can actually turn it and see. So we'll have to, you know what, let's pull this pin out. The hardest part of this so far has been putting that top cotter pin in and out. Okay, if we pull this out, yeah, we're up all the way. So it's working. Let's try it from inside the car. Okay, we're in park right now. Reverse, neutral, drive, second, first. Yeah. So obviously this is not going to be calibrated anymore. So we'll just get rid of that thing. And I mean, you just got to count how many clicks. One click down, reverse. One more is neutral. You know, you'll figure it out. This piece is completely missing on my truck and it works fine. You get used to it. Or Shannon can make her own that's calibrated. That was easy. Okay. Should we take it off and paint it black? Let's do it. Okay, shifter linkage is done. Cross that off the list. All right, what's next? Modulator valve. That should be pretty easy. Modulator valve is what makes it shift. No idea how it works, because I have no idea how automatic transmissions work. Just magic or something like that. But what I do know is the little valve on the back here. This is the modulator valve right here. So it needs a vacuum line to go from here to a manifold vacuum, which we can get. There's several places you can get manifold vacuum. There is a little port at the back of the intake manifold right here. We can tap into that, or we can tap into this fitting here on this Edelbrock carburetor. It's got a couple different vacuum ports here. That one is manifold vacuum, which means vacuum from below the carburetor venturis. And this one is ported vacuum, meaning vacuum from above the venturis. And the difference that makes is, how can I explain this? So the vacuum that it will be up here is going to be less than the vacuum in here when the car is idling, because the throttle plates will be closed, so it's not going to be sucking in as much air or something like that. I don't know. I'm a fabricator, not really a tuner. So I know enough to make my cars run, but I'm not like a crazy tuner guy. So yeah, I know that the carburetor, in my head I know how it works, but I don't know enough to explain how to make it work. But you can Google that yourself. You got lots of time. What I do know is we need to connect that valve on the transmission all the way up to here. So to do that, we could just run a solid vacuum line like this, except for I don't have enough vacuum line. This is all I have right now. So we'll just use little bits of this and some 3/16 copper nickel tubing. We'll get a measurement and then cut some tubing. So this is basically the same concept as when we made the transmission lines in the last video. I got a rough measurement, basically from taking a tape measure and kind of measuring my route where I want to go, and came up with 4 feet. I had a cutoff, or like an end of the roll piece hanging on the wall here, which looks like it could be pretty close to 4 feet. So we're going to stretch it out here on this tubing straightener and get a quick measure. I mean, if it's pretty close, we can make it work. What a great little tool. Okay, what do we got here? It is 48 inches, 4 feet. Oh, I love when stuff like this works. Okay, here's our piece. Basically, we're just gonna go underneath the car now and just kind of bend it until we get it in the right shape. This copper nickel tubing is so easy to bend. You don't even need a tubing straightener. You can just bend it with your thumbs. Back to the car. I know I said you don't need a tubing straightener for this, or a tubing bender, but I have a tubing bender, so I'm gonna use it. Mostly because this top area, like everyone's gonna be seeing it, and I don't want you judgy people to judge me on my bends, so I wanna make them really nice. Basically this end here needs to connect to there. So if we take a little piece of hose to make a 90 off there, then from here we can make a nice swooping 90, and this will run along the back of the intake manifold and then kick down. So my very first bend is going to be a 90. That's going to start everything off. So we'll put this in the tubing straightener here. This is a really cheap Princess Auto tubing straightener, so you kind of got to walk it. You can't just pull it around like the nice ones. So we're going to go right to 90 degrees. And then we'll take a measurement to the back of the intake and go down. That's probably pretty close there. Okay, there's our first bend. Tape measure. So if we go from about the front of the carburetor to the back here is, 13 inches or so. Go back on here to 13 inches is about there, and I am just going to use my thumbs for that because I am. All right, let's tuck this down and see how it fits. All right, I think I'm happy with that. The rest we're going to do from underneath the car. All right, our modulator valve's all hooked up. We've got a little piece of rubber vacuum line right here that goes into the copper nickel tubing, runs along the intake manifold, and is held down with a little Adele clamp right there. From there, it goes down the back of the transmission. Underneath here, it basically just runs along the bell housing, kicks up, and goes along the top of the transmission here. We've got a little factory clamp that I reused. And then underneath here, it hooks back into a rubber vacuum hose that goes into the modulator valve. Easy peasy. So while I had vacuum lines out, I figured I might as well hook up the vacuum advance for the distributor as well. And that's when I realized something. That I hooked the modulator valve up to the ported vacuum instead of the manifold vacuum. And you guys sat there and watched the whole time, and nobody said anything. You guys just made me look like an idiot, so thanks a lot. I thought you guys were on my team. Yeah, I hooked it up to the wrong side, so not a big deal. We just made a new vacuum hose from here over to here, to the correct side, the manifold side, and I found a little cutoff of 3/16 tubing on the bench, and we had enough vacuum line to, or vacuum hose, to continue that off. So let's grab our grease pencil over here, and we can come and cross off modulator valve is done, as well as vacuum advance is done. All right, what are we gonna do next? For transmission related stuff, drive shaft and transmission fluid and trans gasket are all that's left, and those we're waiting on parts for. So if we move over here, we've got fuel line and fuel pump. Now, as I mentioned earlier today in this video, this engine was originally a fuel injected engine. It came out of a 91 Mustang. So Shannon has taken all the fuel injection stuff off and made it look like a 1960s 289, but the timing cover does not have a boss in it for a mechanical fuel pump. So to get around that, what we're gonna do is just put an electric inline fuel pump at the back of the car next to the fuel tank, and we'll just run just a fuel line from the firewall up to the carburetor. There'll be no fuel pump on the engine at all. So we'll probably do the fuel pump first before the fuel line. Let's go find it. Here's our fuel pump here and all the bits that come with it to make it work. This is a Spectra Premium SP1130. This thing puts out 4 to 7 PSI and about 60 gallons per hour, which should be plenty for what we're doing. Comes with all the barbed fittings. It comes with little isolators that go in here, all the bolts, pigtails for the wiring harness. This is basically the same one, like same idea as the one that we put in the 32 Roadster back there. This one's just doesn't pump quite as much fuel. So let's see how it fits under here. Underneath the car here, we've got the gas tank here, and here's our fuel line right here. So everything's nice and easy to get to. If we take our pump here, the pump's supposed to be mounted as close to the tank as possible. So I don't know, maybe we could just run a couple self-tappers through there. That should work, huh? I'm just kidding, obviously, this is the gas tank. But I think if we take this bracket here, and where these holes are up at the top, these guys right here, if we fold this over 90 degrees, we should be able to bolt it to the bottom of the floor. And then bolt this to it, so it should sit, you know, about there. Then we can take this hose and just put it in here and have another hose coming out of here back into our steel fuel line. After that, it's just running a little bit of wiring. So let's see if we can fold this over. If we can't, we can just make a different bracket that fits. But I think we can bend this.
I haven't got my coat or shoes. I lost another set of keys. Laying on a patio is a concrete at my cheek. Thinking of how good it feels as I'm not off to sea. I feel that filthy groove again. My load is on as I begin. I fight that demon until I win. As I feel that filthy groove again. I feel that filthy groove again. My load is on as I begin. I test my metal until it bends. 'Cause I feel that filthy groove.
With this bracket bent 90 degrees, the fuel pump fits nice up against the floor. It doesn't look like it from this angle, but the gas tank is actually lower than it, so it's not the lowest point on the car, despite it looking that way from this angle. So let's drill some holes now, and then we can bolt it in here. So while I'm working on the fuel pump, Shannon is here because it's Saturday now. She had to work yesterday, and she's working on the gauge situation. She just painted this little gauge insert panel. Yesterday, after we left the shop for the day, we went to go get dinner, and we were gonna go to Princess Auto and get just like the cheap little 3-pack gauge cluster. They're like 40 some bucks. So we messaged our friend Brian Betts because he lives in that area, and we're like, hey, you wanna get dinner? And so when we told him why we were in that area, he's like, don't go to Princess Auto and get cheap made in China gauge, just stop by my house. So we stopped by his place, and he hooked Shannon up with a set of vintage Stewart Warner gauges. We got the oil pressure, we got a water temperature, we got a cool 60 style bezel. This insert that Shannon just painted goes inside of that. And he had an amp gauge as well, but it didn't match. However, I've got this gauge here. This was, I don't know if you guys remember, in the several months back, I did a video on my 47 Ford, and I put that volt gauge in that I got from my friend Jeremy. not that one, but the same one, and it did not work. Jason Biggs in Oregon, he watched that video and he messaged me and was all like, hey, I have that gauge and I'll send it to you. So he sent it to me like quite a few months ago, and I haven't got around to putting it in yet. So we're gonna put it in Shannon's car instead. Our other friend, Sean Stewart in, where's he live? Castlegar? Somewhere in like the Kootenay area in BC. He also messaged me during that 47 Ford video, and he also had the same gauge. So I got a hold of Sean this morning, and he's going to send that gauge. So Jason's gauge is going to go in Shannon's car, and Sean's gauge is going to go in the 47 to replace that one. None of this has anything to do with the fuel pump, which is what I'm working on. So I'm going to get back to that. I just finished drilling holes. Shannon is watching paint dry so she can put the bolts in through the top, and then I'll put some nuts on the bottom, and we'll have a fuel pump.
I feel that filthy groove again. My load is on as I begin. I fight that demon.
Okay. More. Okay. All right, we got gas coming out of the tank, into the pump, out of the pump, and back into the fuel line to the front. Our ground wire, we just hooked up to when we bolted this bracket on. And we still gotta do our power wire. I just found a relay that we can wire in for that. But Shannon is working under the dash right now, so we'll have to do that later.
How good it feels as I'm not off to sea. I feel that filthy.
While Shannon's hogging everything underneath the dash, I've skipped finishing the fuel pump and moved on to the fuel line. So the original 6-cylinder fuel line ran basically up to this shock tower, and then it had a little rubber hose that jumped over to the fuel pump, which sat on this side of the engine. I've rerouted the original line and got it to come up by the brake booster. And now I just bent up a little 5/16 copper nickel line to run along the firewall. This will hook into the original line, and then from here, that will hook into the carburetor. Also, I just want to apologize. It was not Jason Biggs. Jason Biggs is an actor. It was Jeff Briggs who donated that Stuart Warner volt gauge that Shannon has just put in. I'm so sorry, Jeff. Okay, I'll show you where this goes. Basically, it will run along the firewall pretty much like that. And then we'll just have a little rubber hose from here to here. I got my automotive start with race cars. My dad and Doug and Badge, they were really into drag racing. So that's how I got my start through cars, was through drag racing. And race cars, you don't want rubber in your fuel system. NHRA has a rule, 6 inches is the most rubber you're allowed in a fuel system. So I always keep that in mind. I mean, this car doesn't need to pass an NHRA tech, so it doesn't matter. But I try to keep the rubber fuel hose to a minimum. And that's just for fire reasons. Rubber burns, metal tubing does not. So, all right, I'll mount it.
Well, I made a little stop on the way home from work. You know that place just drives me crazy. Yeah, that boss, he's such a jerk. Well, Son says happy hour. Yeah, I started feeling mighty fine. Once I fell into the gin, I really lost my mind.
I've just finished wiring up the fuel pump. I got a little relay mounted under the dash here with a inline fuse right behind it. So it steals key power from under the dash here. And I've got a wire run to our battery here, following the stock harness along here. That puts power to the relay, and then out of the relay, since Shannon doesn't have her interior in right now, it was super easy to get to the factory wiring harness. So I ran the fuel pump wire with that, and it just tucks in with the gas gauge to the back of the fuel pump. While I was doing that, Shannon tidied up the plug wires on this side with the old zip tie trick. She painted and installed her air cleaner, and now she just popped up from underneath the car. She is putting the new transmission filter in right now. So the pan's drained, pop that filter out, put this one back in, and then all that's left underneath is for transmission stuff is the drive shaft. All right, we'll cross fuel pump off the list. Next is throttle linkage. I ordered a low-car throttle linkage cable. It should be here on Tuesday. So coil and wire up the distributors next. Also, just a couple other things. Yes, Shannon did put a grommet in there before anybody says anything about that. And second, in the last Comet video, someone was giving us a hard time about putting tools on the fenders. These fenders they might look nice in the video, but they're not. So don't worry about us putting tools and scratching them. I mean, it's not even scratching them really, but yeah, this isn't show quality paint on this thing. We're not trying to save anything. The whole car is going to get repainted this color. One more thing I forgot to point out is Shannon polished all this and put all this together with a brand new gasket. She's got the little windshield squirter goop bag in there. So that's back together. That all came out when we painted the engine bay. All right, so couple things we still got to finish up in here. We've got, this is just a plastic oil pressure line. Shannon actually found this on the train tracks this morning when we were walking Doris, but we decided not to use it. We're going to put a copper one in just because I feel better about using a copper one. Transmission is all back together other than the drive shaft. The water temperature gauge is hooked in. Shannon just put oil in it. We could put coolant in it right now. It's ready for coolant. But unfortunately, we have run out of time for this weekend. So we got a ton of stuff accomplished. It was a really productive weekend. And I think if we have one more weekend like this, I mean, we might button this thing up. It might be ready to do burnouts. So that's going to conclude this video. Thanks everybody for watching. Make sure to check out the website, lgspeedcustom.com, to get yourself a LG Speed and Custom shirt. Stickers, hot rod parts, all that stuff. You guys know the drill. You've seen it before. Also, thanks to Hot Rod Hullabaloo for the music on this video. And yeah, thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.